Thanks for coming. For those of you who don't know me, my name is Tazz. That's my Twitter handle at the bottom, GRC_ninja. I'm in a dress and heels because I lost a bet. This is not, anybody else knows that I would be in a baseball cap and jeans, so we're going to work with it. So the reason I did this talk is I went out to Naval Postgraduate School out in Monterey, and I went down to SOCOM, which is Special Operations Command, down in Florida last month, and had a lot of interesting conversations with those individuals and a few C-levels, talking to some attorneys and things like that. And one of the things that I found was the way we think about threats is very tactical oriented, and a lot of the threat intelligence that we are required to provide for our consumers and our customers is all about fighting the fight right now. Like, what's the threat in front of us? What's going to bring down my network today? And I find that we don't do a lot of strategic style thinking when it comes to threat intelligence. And we never, well, forgive me if I use absolute terms. These are, I should say, majority. We usually don't take the time to view ourselves through our adversary's eyes and understand the value that we are to them from a strategic perspective. How many of you in here spend your days trying to protect your own assets and your own network? How many of you have been told what's of value and what's critical in your network? How many of you have ever walked over and asked, not China, if they thought that what you thought was important is important? One person. Okay. But seriously, a lot of times we see ourselves as the target. We rarely take the time to think of ourselves as the third domino in somebody's longer game. And that's kind of what I'm here for today, is to try to just challenge the way we think of things. And not to say that anything we're doing is wrong. I just think it's time for us to start doing more. Okay? So I want to ask if you can even imagine motives, goals, structure, organization, methods of an adversary. What does this sound like? Motives, goals, structure, organization, and methods. TTPs, right? If you can't even imagine it, how can you possibly defend against it? Right? If you can't think of an original idea, how could you ever build something? The wheel wouldn't exist if somebody hadn't thought of it first, right? So if we can't think like our adversary, if we can't even play the imaginary game, go home with your 5-year-old and have an imagination, then how are we going to defend against things that we can't even think might be possible, right? And I'm talking serious tinfoil hat stuff sometimes. But your imagination as you get older is one of the things that we have a tendency to not do. I sit and I look at little kids and they're playing with their imaginary friends, and they've got a whole set of imaginary rules for the castle and the moat and the alligators and the spaceship that's coming in over the wall of the castle. And it makes me sit and think back to, like, man, I remember when somebody was asking, how would you defend this castle? And a whole bunch of people come up with all these rules about how they would defend the castle. And then somebody throws them a monkey wrench and he says, well, you just got bombed by a spaceship. Didn't see that coming, right? And so, but the point is that we have a tendency to stop using our imagination as we get older. And if you sit and if you have kids, they'll keep you young. And I encourage you, like, seriously, ask a 5-year-old how would they attack you. You'd be amazed at some of the things that they would come up with. Especially a 5-year-old that can write Python. I'm telling you, they're dangerous kids. So, I really want to try to have a conversation today. I don't like agendas and plans and being rigid. This is to invoke and provoke thinking today. So please feel free to raise your hand if you have a comment or a question. If I mentioned something and you guys have done it and you've succeeded, or even if you failed, share your story here today. I want this to be a thinking room today, not a Taz sits here and preaches to people. So we'll go over a little bit of the difference between tactical and strategic digital threat intelligence. And I don't like the word cyber, but cyber gets you funding. So if you need to use cyber is authorized for funding discussions only. Okay? We'll talk about target development. How many military people in here do I have that have ever done targeting or target development? Okay, so you guys will understand some of my phrasing. We do what? I broke OPSEC, right? So But we'll talk a little bit about doing target development from a cyber perspective, right? And then we'll take some questions. So if you have pen and paper, if you have a cell phone, feel free to take a picture of this slide, jot this down. This was written many years ago, and the irony is that everything he says in this about what we don't do and how we're not doing strategic intelligence right is still true today. I've learned a lot from this individual and from his writings and third-party knowledge nuggets he's passed down. But this, if you are doing threat intelligence or you want to do threat intelligence, I strongly encourage you to read his white paper. This is a book for those of you who may be building a threat intelligence organization. This is a really awesome book. It's an easy read. One of the things that I think is a really good takeaway from his book is he helps you communicate security to C-levels. Some of us struggle with that verbiage and bridging that gap in saying things, well, no, we need to protect this, or this is important. I need money to buy this tool, to buy this widget, or to hire this person, or hire this talent, or go to this class. Well, why? Because I want to make that, we need to protect stuff. Well, he helps you translate the how to protect and how to build an organization and how to build a team. That's another really good book. I think it's like $2.99 on Amazon on Kindle. Like seriously, $3 to invest into your knowledge base. So we'll talk a little bit about the objectives. There's 2 objectives for this talk. Yes, sir. Sure. Can you say the title slow? I see some people writing. Security and Privacy in Computer Systems. Willis Ware is the author? From Rand Corporation. Thank you for sharing. Anybody else have a reading suggestion? Awesome. Okay. So 2 objectives a day. Challenge the way you think now and encourage critical thinking. I think critical thinking is a skill that a lot of us lack. I see a lot of people coming out of technical hands-on classes or degree programs, and I get around these like super whiz kids, smart, like they could red team and make your network look like Swiss cheese, right? But then when I ask them, so what? You made it look like Swiss cheese, but to what end? Like, so what? Like, even if a bad guy could walk through every one of the holes that you've punched in this network, so what? What would he be after? What would his objective be? What's the secondary and tertiary effects of these holes not being plugged? What's the business impact to this not being plugged? What leverage or strategic advantage does being in your network give the bad guy if you're not his target? And a lot of them can't think past, oh my God, I got domain admin on a domain controller. And? So you own the network, now what? What are you going after in here now? What's important that's not on your list of things that's important? And trying to get people to do that critical thinking beyond just the immediate threat is something that I find a lot of us don't do. We have a tweet goes out, here's a new O-Day, somebody didn't do responsible disclosure, they caused FUD, everybody's hair's on fire. Did we plug it? Yes, we plugged it. Okay, whew, and we're done. And we stop thinking beyond that. It's plugged. Does it patch? It's patch. It's done. So critical thinking, if you're interviewing people, try to find a way, get with your HR people to have some sort of interview set of questions that actually helps reveal whether or not somebody can actually do critical thinking. Let them tell you areas that they're strong in and weak in, and then give them something that they're weak in, but just see, can they figure out a solution? I did an interview. I do not write Perl. Okay, Pearl, I was like, they showed this to me, and I was like, I have no fucking clue what that is. And they were like, well, what do you think? And I looked, and I was like, well, let's see. Programmer basics teach me this. Anything on the right side of an equal sign goes into what's on the left side of an equal sign. And I just started, taking it down by the basics, and could I tear it apart? And I was like, well, I don't know for sure that this is what it does, but this is what I think it might be doing. But to get an answer, I would go here, I would go here, I would research this, I'd research this, and I would figure it out. And at the end of that interview, they were like, you are the only person who has ever literally picked it apart, step by step, to try to figure out what you could. You identified what you know and what you don't know, and then you figured out how to go get the answers for what you don't know. And I find that we don't have a lot of people that can do that. That's not a skill set we have. We're good at one thing, we stick at that one thing, and we don't want to go outside of our box. So critical thinking is something that I'm really trying to encourage with this talk here. So tactical versus strategic. If you are on the left side of the screen, you are playing whack-a-mole with IOCs and malware and viruses and threats and Trojans. If you are on the right side of the screen, you are probably doing some level of strategic threat intelligence. Something tells you there is a hole here that probably shouldn't be here. You don't know what's in that hole, but there's an interesting hole in front of you, and you are going to figure out a way to determine what either went in the hole, is still in the hole, or came out of the hole. The hole is here. I have evidence that something was here. I don't know what it was, but it's going to take that cat on the right a little bit longer to get his answer, but he can still get his answer, right? How many of you are cat fans? Okay, yes, I got one brownie point. Okay, so a little bit of difference between strategic and tactical. Most of us, I would say 90% of us that are in InfoSec live on the right-hand side of this slide. You're always being asked what's wrong now, what's going on, what's the threat landscape look like, what's the latest threat, and you're dealing with answering what's current and what's now. The threat intelligence you have to derive is IOCs, TTPs, network artifacts, forensics. They want the bottom line up front. That's what the bluff is. And it pays immediate dividends. And it's really easy to get funding for things that are going to show immediate return, right? How many attacks did we block on the network, right? When you start turning over your metrics, dealing with the right now. And the number one differentiators are at the bottom in red. You have indicators of compromise, which means what? Somebody's already got you, right? But I'm trying to get us to start thinking about indicators of attack. And I'm not necessarily talking about the fact that, yes, somebody Nmap scanned your network, right? I'm not talking about that. I'm talking from it a little bit bigger than that. But the difference is that strategic investigations are timely. Timely doesn't mean it's a long time. It just means it's on time, usually. Now, if you've ever done military intelligence or threat intel, any intel of any kind, people are always complaining, well, why didn't you tell me? Well, I did try to tell you, but you didn't want to listen. Well, why didn't you tell me sooner? Well, because we couldn't know that. We don't have a magic 8-ball, and you can't predict everything. Okay, so it's timely just meaning like we say, you know what? There's a lot going on in the South China Seas right now. I wonder how much of what we make is manufactured in that region. Do we have any third or fourth order elements that come from any factories out there? Do we own any assets in that area? Might somebody want to use us as a pivot point to get into somebody else's stuff? And that's why I'm saying timely, being aware of what's going on in the world. Strategic is also about making connections, and it's not always A to B. It's normally somewhere from A to J, right? You're trying to connect the dots amongst the breadcrumbs with strategic intelligence. That's why it takes a little bit longer to develop. It does pay exponentially in the long run, though. If you can anticipate an attack, you do not widely advertise that you have put mitigations for things in place, and then you see that attack that you predicted come and that attack fails miserably, that pays dividends. How many of you guys remember the denial of service attack with the Mirai bot. Okay? Big news, right? Was anybody talking about the botnet attack that had happened to the provider in Canada that was twice the size? It wasn't on the news. Why? Because Brian Krebs wasn't there, right? Okay. So, but Brian Krebs gets shut down because whatever, people are trying to DDoS his site and all this other stuff. But the point is that I sat and we started talking about that, and I said, you know, how many people thought about the other strategic partners that were behind or co-located with Brian Krebs' website? How many of them said, oh, well, maybe there was a whole bunch of noise made over here and a lot of attention drawn to something because something else could have been going on over here? How many of you guys have ever heard the theory that maybe ransomware is used to cover other malicious activity? Okay. Well, when the first piece of ransomware hit and I was sitting there, I was like, you know what? I bet you they did some other fuckery on that network. And they just want them to not pay the ransom so that they'll nuke it. Right? If a ransom is so high that it's cost prohibitive to pay for it, they want you to nuke that system, right? I'm sorry, if I'm holding a ransom, isn't my objective to get paid? If I'm going to ransom something, usually an objective for somebody trying to hold a ransom is to get paid, right? You don't want to price yourself out of getting paid if your true objective is to get paid. So again, this goes back to critical thinking. A lot of people weren't thinking like that. I was approached about should I pay a ransom or not, and I was like, well, you're kind of effed if you don't have backups, but if you do have backups, I recommend just putting this on the shelf until whatever that is can be reversed or there's a solution later, because you might be surprised at what you find out is actually was a bigger problem, that if you nuke that system, you're going to lose that evidence. Yes? Very good point. So where does strategic threat thinking come in? Many of you guys have seen David Bianco's Pyramid of Pain. How many people are familiar with Pyramid of Pain? Okay, if you're not familiar with the Pyramid of Pain, it's excellent. I credited James Deedle on this as well because he added to this, okay? But basically, starting from the bottom to the top, it's how difficult is it for an attacker to modify what you see in the pyramid. Once you get past TTPs, though, what next? How many of you are actually doing target development from an attacker perspective after you have TTPs? Not very many hands in the room are going up, and that's really why I'm here today. Like, we stop after we identify TTP, and God bless the guys that made the APT encyclopedia. Y'all forgive me, I'm horrible with names. But like going through and reading that, and if you've done threat modeling and you understand where your threats come from, are you US based only, are you global, things like that. I had an interesting story the other day shared with me when I was talking about my talk, and I will leave the company nameless. But the individual mentioned to me, I said, a lot of us don't think about the fact that we have a page on our website that says these are our strategic partners. How many of you have a strategic partner page listed on your company's website somewhere? Or across the bottom, you list all these big name companies that your product is used with or you partner with. Well, and I told him, I was like, so what happens when somebody doesn't like somebody you partner with strategically? You become a second or a third domino if they are the end target. Okay, you may not be. Yes, there's an obvious one. And the reason I didn't use the Target example, to be honest, is because we get hung up on the word third-party service provider. Being a strategic partner isn't the same as being a third-party service provider. Sometimes you can be a reseller, a value-added reseller of a strategic partner, right? How many of you are VARs or know what value-added reseller is? Okay. So when you have, and we'll just pick it, like networking technology, right? One vendor can go in and do a consultation with their client, and the client says, I want to stand up a network, right? How many vendors do we have that make routers and switches? Okay. Well, they could be a value-added reseller that could sell any one of those routers and switches, right? They're bringing them in because they feel like they should be unbiased, right? Like, you're going to give me the best recommendation to build my network because you're not actually selling me the product. You're going to get me the product that works the best. So if you're a value-added reseller and you have a strategic partnership with somebody, do you think you might be a target if somebody has a personal issue or a hacktivist-motivated issue with somebody that you partner with? And the story they shared with me was that they were strategically partnered. They are a security company, and they're strategically partnered with somebody else. And the leadership of that partner did something that human rights activists were just over the moon about, right? And they didn't think that they would be the target. They're like, oh man, you did this socially unacceptable thing. You are like, buddy, watch out. Hate it for you. But what they didn't realize was that they were actually becoming the domino to get to them. Not because they were a service provider or anything else, but because they had a strategic partnership with them. So what I want us to start doing is, if we get to TTPs and we get to that level, this is where the strategic thinking starts taking place after we've done all of these things in our day-to-day InfoSec world. Excuse me. Chad, that Atchmew is for you. Okay, so strategic thinking can come in before or after a breach. Before you have a breach in malware, you want to ask yourselves, what do you have that's critical input to someone else? We talked a little bit about this. And what serious vetting have you done about third-party vendors? Notice I didn't say service provider, I just said vendors. ISPs especially, how many of us use internet at work? How many of you own your own internet? Not very many of us, right? If it's after a breach, when you think about what was taken or accessed that was not PII, and why would somebody want that? Tinfoil hat moment. How many of you guys remember the Anthem breach? Okay. Was there? No, wait. The very first one. You're correct there. The very first one. How many of you guys remember that? How many of you guys remember all of the articles that followed about those health records being sold? Which was how many records got sold? How many health records actually got sold? How many of you guys remember the OPM breach that followed not long after? Now, if I wanted to assassinate somebody, wouldn't it be great if I had all of that information from OPM and then I had all this information about their medical health to make it look like it was a natural death? Tinfoil hat, I told you, right? But these are the kinds of things of making connections between what are sometimes seemingly unrelated events and seeing how they may affect you, right? If something in your city gets hacked, right? How does that affect you? How many of you guys heard about the sirens in Dallas that got turned on? Oh yeah, I'm on the DC 214 group. Man, the threads we had on that, right? So we had everything from people saying, hey, I think this might have been a test of the system to see how emergency responders respond, to some attacker may have wanted to see what the threshold of the 911 system was, right? If you guys do military type stuff, people will go in, set off a small bomb, see how long it takes for emergency responders to respond, and then there were secondary attacks that used to come after that but they learned, right? They did these little tests. So we have every theory in the world going on there. And so I started asking people, say, how many people are keeping up on IoT, air conditioning type stuff? Okay, I have a few people keeping up on IoT air conditioning. Can you imagine Dallas, Texas in August if I could turn on everybody's air conditioner so that they couldn't shut it off? I can overload the power grid, which can cause brownouts and blackouts, which could then allow me to do what? Whatever the hell I damn well want to, right? But again, can we go back to imagining these kinds of scenarios? So how many of you did your C-levels list your IoT air conditioning control units as things that are critical to protect? Nobody. But if we sit and we think about ourselves and what we have and how we can play a strategic role in somebody else's attack, those air conditioning control elements seem a lot more important now, don't they? Right? Again, going back to imagining. So we get hung up on breaches and PII, and let's be honest, we're all numb to them now, aren't we? Right? Like 10 years ago, when the VA guy lost a laptop that had all these veterans, oh my God, hair on fire! Now it's like I literally retweet 2 bots that do nothing but tweet breaches. And I probably retweet those 2 bots like, I don't know, 5 times a week. Right? So we get all hung up on PII and everything else, but a lot of times we're not thinking about what else beyond PII. Like, I'm sorry, I don't think they hacked into OPM because they want to make credit cards in my name. Or that they want to steal my identity. Probably not the objective, right? So if you find people that are in your network or you find something unusual or anomalous, a lot of us go straight to going to the PII, and we're looking in our networks at PII or credit card information, right? Because we don't want to get the fine, we don't want to get the whammy. But what else do you have from a data perspective that could be of strategic value to somebody else? I promise you it's probably not the PII that you have. How many of you guys have blueprints? How many of you guys have schematics? How many of you guys have manuals? How many of you have a library with manuals of shit that's older than your grandmother? But somebody scanned it into PDF, right? So if I needed to get information from something that's not easily available on the internet, and I know that you have a massive library that has all the information I need to be able to plan the next stage of my attack, do you think your library might be of value to me? But these are these places that we go looking for bad guys. We're not looking there, right? So it's time to take a look at what you have that's going to be of value to an attacker where you are the second or third domino in the attack, that you are not the primary target. Yes? So for not everybody here in the room is since we'll use the OPM attack, right? If somebody in here works for a bakery, they probably don't care, so that wouldn't factor into their strategic thinking. But if I want to think about what somebody could use with that information, so I would think that if I'm going to make up a scenario off the top of my tinfoil hat. OPM data, one of the things we lost was fingerprints, right? Okay, blood types. So if I am an organization that is doing anything with biohacking. Yes, biometrics. So if I'm an organization that does biometric research, right, or I'm a university, or I'm a college, pharmaceuticals, if I'm doing anything with bloodborne agents, if I'm doing research in bugs entomology or herbal solutions, right? Say I'm an herbal company and I'm doing research into benefits of herbal supplements or stuff like that for health conditions, treating cancer or treating some life-threatening situation. I might need to keep in the back of my mind that, okay, well, if somebody has all of this information about somebody else's health condition and my research where I have failed to create a cure, if you failed to create the cure, what did you do to the lab rat? You killed it. Okay. So maybe my failed research needs to be protected just as much as my ongoing successful research. So when I'm doing the tinfoil hat, so my answer to you is it would depend upon what company I'm working with as to what other things or, historical events have occurred would be relevant to them. Does that make sense? Okay. I think I saw a hand. Yes. Very good point. Yes, ma'am. Absolutely. Easy way to blackmail somebody, huh? Okay. Did I have another hand back there? I had one more comment for. Well, from the corporate sharing perspective, I mean, yes, I can see those. I don't say I agree. I say I can see those arguments. But from an InfoSec perspective, if we can't think of it, nobody said we had to share it, right? But if we can't think of it and we can't think of those connections, then how can we even begin to protect or defend or justify sharing them? It's okay in your own corporate boardroom to sit down and draw the breadcrumb trail out on a whiteboard and explain to somebody why this thing that you guys have that may have been not so important 5 years ago is probably way more important now than what they realize. Because I understand we are all of us. How many of you have been called a hacker? Who's not been called a hacker by somebody in this room, right? So, and I try to tell people, I'm not a hacker, you guys. Quit calling me that. But be honest, they look to us as hackers for that expertise, right? They don't understand how somebody's going to pivot and cause the dominoes to fall, right? We have to lay that out for them. If we can't lay it out for them, then there's no way they're going to give us money or resources or help us hire the talent that we need into our teams to protect these things, right? Or that they're going to pay to take the measures. Now, yes, I'm not going to spend $10 million to protect something that costs $1,000. But what if I made an argument that $1,000 thing really is worth way more than $1,000? You think it's $1,000, boss man, but really that's like a $1 trillion value to these bad guys. Sometimes it may be that you need to go back and help them reevaluate the value of an asset. And that is something that I find is the most common because they undervalue it because they don't understand where it fits into an overall attack strategy. So now we've gone from I'm sorry. Yes.
Going along with that, people still value it. You really let the right side. So that which would be considered input data because I failed, but I didn't come up with product and stuff. But data can also be used cover or is, you know, being identified for the government. I'm trying to confirm whether they're real or not. Let me show up in OPM. They don't have a record of this name. Well, now I know that person is real. And it's not actual data that I stole. That's only data that I stole. Like the hack. So the absence would also be in that part of the society.
True. Now we know why. Now we hear why the rat died, right? Okay. Yeah, that's a very good point. So we've gone from being able to imagine motives, goals, structure, organization, methods of adversaries to now can we comprehend them? Can we actually begin to understand why? Not just fairy tale land. Let's take it to the next level. Let's actually comprehend that this scenario is possible. We're not getting into grading far-fetched or not yet. Possible, right? So now I'm going to talk a little bit about a variety of disciplines, and these are literally just some. This is not an exhaustive list, but in taking real-world events and then making you think about something that might be a related cyber target. And these slides are going to get posted on SpeakerDeck. So you guys will be able to have access to them. I'm on speakerdeck.com/GRC Ninja with no underscore. So from an economics perspective, anything that can alter the value of currency, when you have trade agreements, who likes who plays well with each other versus who doesn't play well with each other. Maybe you have a social movement going on in a particular region where maybe your company owns resources or acquires resources from. And anything that's industrialization or provides access to education and information. As Westerners, a lot of times we take for granted our ability to Google something. We take it for granted that we can get a quick, fast, easy answer by jumping on any internet-enabled or access device, right? There are countries that have no internet, or that they have heavily moderated and monitored, I can't get that word out, heavily monitored internet access, right? Citizens are afraid to even search for things because, you know, they think everything from the enter button on their keyboard is hacked all the way to their ISP provider, right, and everything in between. So where would a strategic threat fall that you might want to start looking for in advance there? So these are more of questions, and I always tell people from an economic perspective, think about what affects your ability to have commerce, not e-commerce, just day-to-day commerce. Does your company ship things? Not that you're Amazon, but do you ship things? Do you mail products somewhere? Or if you're not a service-oriented industry, you're a physical component that you provide. What affects your ability to monitor your supply chain, your product when it's on a train, when it's on a truck, when it's on a plane? What affects your ability to do that kind of monitoring? Those would be a strategic target. If you're the person that provides another company's ability to monitor where something's being shipped and when it's there, right? Maybe what I want to do is steal their stuff, right? Maybe I want to destroy it. Maybe I want to blow it up. Maybe I want to make sure they don't get the shipment. Okay, so who am I going to go after? They're my end target, but who am I going after? I'm going after anybody who's doing the logistics support, right? Logistic companies, I'm sorry, if you work for a logistics company, you are a total target all the time for everybody. You are the third domino for everything. Exports and imports, product manufacturers. If you definitely, you know that you're a target, second or third order in something. If you are, anything that you make is controlled by export or import. Okay. And there's one more thought I had on this. Oh, if you are an enabler, the last one listed. If you're a vendor of technology, software, or equipment that supports these things as well. If you make it's a really bad example. So there was a washer that was made by a government contractor, and that government contractor provided that washer to airplanes for the Air Force. And the parts kept breaking, and it almost killed service members. And then they had to go backwards to figure out that they were getting inferior washers. Okay, the plane's flying, something starts to fall apart, the plane falls out of the sky, right? We don't want that. But the washers were inferior. Well, it wasn't that the government contractor was providing an inferior washer. It was that the plant where the washers were being made had been compromised, and the alloy, the other metals that were being mixed into the raw liquid form of the metal before the washer was molded and formed, is what had got compromised. They compromised the company that provided the input to create the washer so that they could make the planes that were using these washers vulnerable or weakened. Again, strategic thinking, right? Second or third order steps. Yes?
Just to add, from a military perspective, when talking about logistics, military organizations are so heavily dependent on logistics for warfighting, manipulating that integrity. You say it's just a human error, and you thought you had 50 cases of bullets come in, and you had 5, you now lose a battle because of that. And you probably first thought it was an error, didn't realize it was a manipulation by a malicious threat. Probably one thing that
And if I could manipulate the counts at the person that's supplying it to you, not compromising any military assets, but I'm able to compromise the data that comes in, right? And you're just the shipper, and the shipping inventory form, when I scan that barcode, is going to automatically update my quantities, right? Well, what if I can fuck with your barcode? How many of you guys have ever done stocking in your life? Did you ever count, or did you just zap, 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 zap? That's what we do. We're going to zap, 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 and go because we want to go home. Manual labor sucks. But seriously, I mean, so to his point though, if I could manipulate the printer that's printing out the barcode, how many people have your printers listed on your top 3 to 5 critical assets? 2 people. Yay! No, I'm joking. Okay, so, what did you say? Okay, he's mumbling. He can't share. It's okay. So, from a business paradigm, where threat actors may be looking to compromise something, if there's an acquisition, we know that when somebody's buying somebody else, that's a great time to get in there and screw with stuff because everybody's counting the beans and the bean counters before they buy the new company. You want to make sure that everything's on the books and all of the company's resources are going into making sure that the merger and the acquisition go well. And we kind of start to cut corners to make things work well together. We start to punch holes in firewalls. So, yeah, or we're gonna leave that open all weekend so that you can get it done before Monday. Yeah, okay. But who might be a strategic target if there's things going on, if there's an acquisition going on, or a major competitor announces a product? Because let's be honest, strategic threat intelligence, sometimes the bad guy is simply your biggest competitor. I mean, corporate espionage is nothing new. You don't hear a lot about it in the news, but man, that's some vicious stuff. Like, I've literally been contacted and asked to commit a felony on behalf of somebody. They were going to pay me a lot of money. I'm like, there is no amount of money you can pay me for me to go do that. No, you need to find another solution. That is not how you do that. So, but you might want to be thinking, and again with the washer example for the airplanes, who made the tech that's in the equipment? How many of you guys remember the TSA scanners? And I forget the researcher's name who went in and found the X-ray. Was it the X-ray machines? I think it was. And there were components in there that had no business being in there, made from China, that were literally communicating data across the airport networks back to China. Anybody ever think about the tech that's in the equipment that you use? Go rip it apart. Give it to Spencer. He'll reverse all of it. Give it to Josh. Purchase orders also revealing your capabilities. How many of you, and if you're military, you get this, but if you're a civilian, you might not. Wouldn't it be really cool if I knew that you just bought 1,000 Cisco switches? Wouldn't it be interesting if I knew that you had only bought 2 Cisco switches ever and never bought another switch or a router for your company? What do you think purchase orders say about your capabilities and your ability to defend? Or the lack of a purchase order? What if I can get in to your finance department? I'm not going to go after your strategic finances, but I can go in literally to a share drive and I can traverse a directory for everything that you've bought in the last 10 years. Because who puts that on a share drive, right? Nobody would ever put old invoices on a share drive that everybody can have read access to, right? Did I say that? Of course, intellectual property is always a strategic target. And then your strategic partners, lists, and calendars. You'd be surprised what you guys put on calendars about who's going to what conference, and you make it public. Yeah. Military, just a second. A lot of strategic targets, if you are key leader, and this was, and when I say key leader here, I'm also talking about military key leaders in foreign countries, not just our own, right? But if your CEO or your vice president or your COO is going to fly to another country to visit with somebody over there for selling your product line, right? Establishing new business in a foreign country because you're expanding or you're global, it might be interesting to think about or know of the types of technology that they have in the vehicles that they're going to pick your CEO up in at the airport, right? Well, boss, do you know what they're picking you up in? Do you know how you're getting there? Do you know what your travel plans are from point A to point B? By the way, maybe since you're going to go visit China, we don't take your corporate laptop with you. Let's give you a new one. How about you take this iPad instead? I mean, a lot of times we don't think about those things, or we bring them back, and how many times are we actually going through those devices after we bring them back, or are we just taking them and saying, thank you, yes, no, boss, you cannot put this on the network. I'm putting this in the closet, and then we're just going to wipe it for the next time that somebody wants to go to China. But how many of you ever did any forensics on that? Not a lot of people do, right? A lot of people just have the laptop, we issue it out, and we never think about what might come back on it. You'd be surprised. Critical infrastructure, I know I've got some SCADA guys in the room, ICS guys in the room. Critical infrastructure, we're always talking about that. But like I said, from a strategic perspective, if I really wanted to bring down a power grid, what's easier, to hack a thermostat and control all the thermostats in the city or in major buildings, or for me to go hack the power plant? What's an easier target? The thermostats, right? Okay. So my favorite here is don't kill the researchers, okay? Don't kidnap them, don't torture them. Simply socially engineer them at a bar, give the researcher a thumb drive. He'll plug it in because he wants to know what the new cool research is that you have. So, but again, if there are things going on from a diplomatic perspective that are in the news, you probably need to be paying attention to those, especially if there's government, private, or government funding that gets awarded to somebody or something. And I will tell you, like, one of the groups that we underestimate are hacktivists. We think that a lot of them are out there just interested in defacing our websites. There is so much more that motivates those people. They're not in it for the money. They're in it to invoke social and political change. Those are some serious emotions that run really, really deep. So think about what you're doing or who you're associated with, that a hacktivist group or a social activist group are really vocally screaming bloody murder about on the internet, on their blogs, on their chat forums, you know, or some reporter talks about it. Pay attention to that kind of stuff. Those are early indicators that something's coming. We're not going to talk about the elections. If you raised your hand for elections, we're not talking about that. No, I'm joking. Yeah. Oh, 5 minutes? Okay. If you guys need to go, I understand. I've only got a couple more slides left and we'll be done for questions. But if anybody's hungry and needs to go eat, I get it. I'm not offended. So, infrastructure, we just talked about that. I wrote a tinfoil hat blog a little while back about how I would go about a 3-level or 4-level stage kind of attack to try to hack ICS. Now, mind you, if you read that, I am not trying to say that ICS hacking is easy by any stretch of the imagination. That is not what the point of that blog is. But it's to say that if I wanted to get into it or I wanted to affect ICS stuff, how would I go about doing that from a strategic perspective? And it was just a different viewpoint on that. But we all know that how many of you guys follow the reports that DHS used to publish on their website about our critical infrastructure? They stopped in January. It only took them how fucking long? I mean, really? Like, and now you can still go get the old reports. Like, I don't get it. Like, you know, it's like, if you're not going to publish anymore, how about you take down the ones you've got up there? We don't need to know. Not everybody needs access to that. But, one of the research projects that I did was on black energy, events in the Ukraine. And I was surprised to be able to go out and find a source that literally listed every manufacturer for every boiler and every engine and every component that they had in every nuclear, hydro, gas, coal power plant that they have. And all I had to do was register. But like this one, it's a single location for this information globally. And we're filling it in for them. Like voluntarily. So data manipulation, that would be a great place to do it. But it's just saying that that information is out there. So how many of you think about research in weather, controlling weather? Okay, that's a great strategic target for somebody. Okay. Who would be the targets? Conferences where multiple critical infrastructure vendors are gathered. Because we would never hack the Wi-Fi at a hotel. Ever. Never, right? You never socially engineer them, chat them up at the bar, right? You'd never do that. Never give them a CD of something really cool presentation that they can go watch later. No bad guy would ever go through that length, would they? Give back. So technology. This slide was more for the non-InfoSec groups. But basically, how many shared service providers does your organization actually use? And then once you can identify those, find out how many of them actually use the shared service provider to provide you a service. That's probably one of the ones that I'm seeing more often now when I'm asked or when people are finding problems or I suggest places to go look. It's not at their immediate third-party service provider. It's at a service provider that they use, that they aggregate to provide you a service. The bottom one here, you guys might laugh, but I actually had a volunteer target for an OSINT project, and he was the Navy SEAL commander. I found everything I needed in one family obituary and his Knights of Columbus membership. But a lot of us let our guard down when we're not at work. So your C-levels, your managers, sysadmins, how many of you guys are providing your real information in your hobbies? And we kind of let our guard down when we walk out of the office. But these, again, are places that would be strategic targets. Now, do you think that your bowling league secretary thinks that she's a target? She probably doesn't. But after this talk, how many of you think she might be? Yes, the bowling league secretary, if they're not InfoSec, is a total target. No, I'm joking. And then if there's religious events going on in the world, the buildings, those icons, memorials, celebrations, especially in non-Western countries that are heavily divided, if you have assets there, think about how your assets might be used to leverage an attack. So how many of you guys remember the Boston Marathon? Okay. So there's the Boston Marathon. We had the bombing in the Boston Marathon. How many of you guys think that any of the businesses along that route ever thought that they might be a pivot point for an attack? Probably zero. Okay? So these are the kinds of things that are going on. It comes, I don't know why I thought of it now on the religious slide. But, so if there's something going on around your corporate headquarters, there's going to be a march, there's going to be a marathon, there's going to be a march for dimes, something like that. You guys might want to take additional measures and start looking at things, because a lot of times those are times when we try to get people out of the offices to go participate in these things for good PR, right? So take a thought on when you see those kinds of events going on, like how somebody might use those events as distractions for what's going on for you, or use you to make a statement if they're a hacktivist, activist, or a terrorist. And no magic 8 balls. You don't find strategic intelligence, you guys. You develop it. You talk. You do critical analysis. There's not a single fucking strategic threat intel feed out there. If they say they are, they're full of shit. Okay? You can't buy this stuff in a feed. You have to be sitting down, going through scenarios, and the scenarios are going to change regularly because life changes. Things happen. World events occur. Staying abreast of proposed legislation is also key. How many of you guys know that there's actually in the House and the Senate, there's a proposed bill for defining a cyber act of war? Any of you guys in the defense industry? Might make life a little bit interesting once the president actually defines and they pass that and he creates a definition for what a cyber act of war is. Staying abreast of proposed legislation is another way to understand where attacks might come from a strategic perspective. And I get asked this question a lot. I'll go through this quickly. Just like if somebody was going to hire a strategic threat intelligence analyst, like what characteristics did I think? And I just kind of put together a list of basic skills. The number one, though, is their ability to think creatively and critically. That single-handedly is probably the biggest skill set that I think someone could use on your team. Now, mind you, this person doesn't have to be a red teamer. This person can have a master's degree in history in a region that you guys operate in. You can teach people cyber, but you can't teach people. Right? So I'm just going to ask you to take this slide with you and ask yourself if you think you actually understand motives, goals, structure, and organization and the methods of your adversaries. And I hate to say it, but I think we're going to say it, cyber. I think this is the domain where we can probably do this the worst. But my greatest fear is that no war fought on the line is ever going to stay online. Boots will go on ground eventually and blood will be shed. We will never totally fight a cyber war in cyberspace. Questions? Yes, sir. Oh, we're not talking about that. No. That's strategic intelligence right there. I know, right? Did anybody learn anything today? And I understand this is probably not the forum that some of you guys may want to ask me your one-on-one questions about your organization or whatever. Feel free. My DM is open on Twitter. If you want to be obscure, you don't have to follow me. You can message me. You can find me after this, and I'm happy to answer any other questions. It's lunchtime. Go eat.